Arthur's Family Truth. The call came at 8:47 that morning. I had just poured my coffee. He didn't raise his voice, he just spoke carefully. Your son was here this morning. I didn't react. I just stood there looking out the window, but the way he said it didn't leave. At the time, nothing about that call made sense. My name is Gerald Harlan. I'm 67 years old. I spent 35 years as a financial analyst, retired at 63, and 2 years ago I lost my wife, Patricia. Everyone called her Patty, to a stroke. It happened fast. She always said that's how she'd want it. No long goodbyes, no hospital months. That was just who she was. After she was gone, the house felt too big. Too quiet, too much space, for things I didn't want to think about. 4 bedrooms, a yard she'd spent years turning into something beautiful, and me walking through all of it alone every day. I kept up with her roses. Not well, but I kept at it. It felt like the least I could do. My son Russell and his wife Sandra Harlan started coming around more after the funeral. Before that, we'd see each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe a birthday here and there. After Patty died, suddenly they were over twice a month, sometimes more. I told myself that was just family stepping up, doing the right thing. I was wrong about that. The first sign I missed was small. Russell started asking questions about my accounts. Nothing direct, just casual. Dad, do you still use First National for everything? Or have you thought about consolidating your investments somewhere? I answered honestly because I had no reason not to. He was my son. I trusted him. The second sign came about 3 months after Patty's funeral. Sandra mentioned, very casually, that her firm handled a lot of estate planning and that she'd seen families go through real problems when paperwork wasn't set up right. She offered to look over my will, just to make sure everything was in order. I thanked her and said I already had an attorney. She smiled and dropped it. The third sign was harder to ignore. My neighbor Barbara Donahue mentioned she'd run into Russell at the hardware store and he'd told her I'd been having some memory problems, that I'd missed appointments, forgotten conversations. Barbara looked at me with that soft, worried expression people use when they're not sure how much to say. I had no idea what she was talking about. I hadn't missed anything. I was as sharp as I'd ever been, but I filed it away. The real play came about 4 months after Patty passed. Russell and Sandra showed up with a folder, thick, organized, tabbed. Sandra laid it on my kitchen table like she'd done this before, which, as a paralegal at a property law firm, she probably had. She explained that it was a trust arrangement, that it would protect me from tax complications, fraud, confusion down the road, that a lot of people my age were doing this, that it was really just common sense. I picked up the folder and read through it. I'd spent 35 years reading financial documents. I knew exactly what I was looking at. It was a broad power of attorney, not limited, not just for medical emergencies. For everything: bank accounts, investment accounts, real estate, the house. All of it would pass to Russell and Sandra Harlan to manage with no restrictions, no requirement to report back to me, and no accountability of any kind. I set the folder down and told them I'd think it over, that I'd want to talk to my own attorney first. Russell said, of course, that made total sense. Sandra said they just wanted to make sure I was protected. They had tea at my kitchen table, and we talked about nothing for half an hour. When they left, I stood at the window and watched their car pull out of the driveway. Then I called Eugene Pratt. Eugene and I have been friends for 40 years. We met when we were both starting out in finance, competing firms, same city. We've played chess on Wednesday mornings for decades. He retired at 60 and has spent the years since doing whatever he feels like, which mostly means traveling and beating me at chess. He's sharp, direct, and he has never once told me what I wanted to hear just to be polite. Read me the key sections, he said when I called. I read them. There was a pause. Gerald, that's not a trust arrangement. That's a surrender. You'd have no control over anything you've spent your whole life building. That's what I thought. Are you going to sign it? Not a chance, I said. But I want to know what's actually going on with Russell. The business, the finances, all of it. Eugene said he'd make some calls. 2 days later, Eugene called me back. We met at a diner on Oak Street, our usual corner booth, and he laid everything out over scrambled eggs and black coffee. Russell's brokerage firm was in serious trouble. Several bad calls in a row, clients pulling out fast. The firm had maybe 60 days before it folded completely. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were rumors, nothing official yet, but consistent across multiple sources, that Russell had been using client funds to cover his own expenses, personal debts, Living costs. Things a broker has no business touching with client money. His total personal debt was somewhere around $480,000, some of it to banks. Some of it to people who don't send polite letters when they want their money back. I sat with that for a moment. He's desperate, Eugene said, and desperate people do things they normally wouldn't. He already did, I said. He tried to borrow against my house about a month ago. The bank turned him down because he's not on the title. Eugene set his fork down. He tried to mortgage your house without telling you, without asking, without mentioning it, without anything. Eugene leaned back. Gerald, you need to move fast. I was already planning to. I left the diner and drove straight to First National Bank to see Arthur Webb. Arthur has managed my accounts for 20 years. He's careful, methodical, doesn't rush. When I walked into his office and told him I needed to talk, he closed the door and listened without interrupting. I told him about the folder Russell and Sandra had brought, about the power of attorney, about what Eugene had found out. When I finished, Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said there was something I needed to know. About a month ago, we received a loan application against your property. The applicant wasn't the owner of record, so we denied it immediately. I noted it in your file, but didn't contact you at the time. I thought it might be some kind of clerical mix-up. Who applied? Russell Harlan. I kept my face calm. It wasn't a mix-up. No, Arthur said. I don't think it was. We spent the next hour going through everything. Arthur set up additional verification requirements on all my accounts. No major transactions without my physical presence at the branch. No phone authorizations for large withdrawals, multi-factor authentication on online access. He flagged my file so that any unusual request would go directly to him first. When we were done, I thanked him, shook his hand, and drove to Dorothy Shaw's office. Dorothy has handled my legal work for 15 years. She's direct, fast, and she doesn't soften things. When I walked in without an appointment, her assistant started to say she was with someone. I told her it was important. Dorothy came out 2 minutes later, took one look at my face, and waved me in. I told her everything. The folder, Arthur's information about the house, Eugene's report on Russell's debts and the rumors about client funds, the neighbor who told me Russell was going around saying I was having memory problems. That last part made Dorothy sit up straight. He's building a narrative, she said. If he can establish even informally that you've been confused or forgetful, it makes a competency challenge easier later. It also makes people less likely to question him if he shows up somewhere claiming to act on your behalf. That's what I figured. She opened her laptop. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm drafting a document today that formally revokes any power of attorney, implied or otherwise, that Russell or Sandra Harlan might claim. It will be notarized and filed before the end of the week. Second, we're updating your will completely. Russell and Sandra come out. Everything goes to charity. Your call on which ones. Third, we draw up a new power of attorney for medical and financial emergencies, naming Eugene Pratt as your agent. Not Russell, not Sandra. Done, I said. There's one more thing. She looked at me steadily. I want you to schedule a full neurological evaluation. Cognitive testing, the works. I know there's nothing wrong with you, I can see that clearly. But if Russell tries to contest your decisions in court, we want a medical report already on file showing your mental status is completely intact. We don't wait for him to attack. We prepare the defense first. I called Dr. Marvin Wells that afternoon and got an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, Dorothy worked fast. The revocation document was notarized and filed within 3 days. The updated will was signed the day after that. Dr. Wells ran a full battery of tests: memory, reasoning, processing speed, verbal fluency. When the results came back, he told me my scores were in the top range for my age group. No signs of cognitive decline. No flags of any kind. He put it all in writing and sent a copy to Dorothy's office. I had the revocation on file. I had the updated will. I had the medical report. I had Arthur watching my accounts, and then I waited. 11 days after I signed Dorothy's paperwork, at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, Clifford Marsh called from First National. I already knew what he was going to say before he finished his first sentence. Russell had walked into the branch with a power of attorney bearing what looked like my signature, and had attempted to withdraw the full $320,000 from my accounts. The signature is forged, I told Clifford. I never signed that document. I'm sending you paperwork right now that proves it. I forwarded Dorothy's revocation filing from my phone in about 3 minutes. Clifford confirmed receipt and told me Russell was still at the branch. I told him to prepare documents to cancel all joint account access for Russell and Sandra Harlan, effective immediately. Then I got in my car and drove to the bank. Arthur Webb met me in the lobby. He shook my hand, walked me upstairs, and we sat down in his office with Dorothy Shaw, who had driven over the moment I called her. Within the hour, every joint account Russell had any access to was closed. The funds moved to my personal accounts only. New passwords, new verification codes, a note in the system requiring my physical presence for any transaction over $500. Dorothy filed the forged power of attorney as evidence with her office records. We had the document, the bank's security footage of Russell presenting it, and testimony from 2 branch employees who had processed the request before Clifford stepped in. Russell's forged signature attempt was now documented, all of it. When I walked out of that bank, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not relief exactly. More like the ground was solid again under my feet. My phone rang before I reached my car. Russell, I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. Dad. His voice was shaking. He was trying to hold it together and failing. What did you do? Why did you close everything? I was trying to help you. I was going to move the money somewhere safer. I swear I was going to, Russell. I kept my voice level. You walked into First National this morning with a power of attorney that has my forged signature on it. You attempted to withdraw $320,000 from my accounts. That's not helping me. That's a felony. Silence. Just his breathing on the other end. I'm in trouble, Dad. His voice dropped. Real trouble. I owe people money, and they're not patient people. I needed that money. I was going to pay you back every cent. I swear on Moms, don't. I said it quietly, but I meant it. Don't bring your mother into this. More silence. You're out of my will, I said. Completely. Sandra, too. I signed those papers 11 days ago. Everything goes to charity, and the bank has the forged document on record. I'm not calling the police today, but understand what you did, Russell. You committed a crime against your own father. He started to say something else. I hung up. The next morning, they both showed up at my door. 8 in the morning, Russell looking like he hadn't slept, Sandra tight and controlled the way she always was when she was working an angle. I let them in. I stayed standing. I told them they had 15 minutes. Russell said he was desperate, that he'd made mistakes, that he'd pay everything back, every dollar. Just give him time. Sandra said I was being irrational, that the will decision was extreme, that I was clearly being influenced by outside parties. She meant Eugene and not thinking clearly. I told her she was welcome to test that theory in court, that Dr. Wells' full cognitive evaluation was already on file with my attorney, and that the forged power of attorney would be the first exhibit in any hearing she wanted to initiate. She went quiet. Russell looked at the floor. I said, if you ever want to come back here as my son, not with a folder, not looking for money, just as my son, the door is open. But I'm done being your safety net. That's finished. Sandra grabbed her bag and walked out without another word. Russell stood there another moment, then he followed her. The door closed quietly behind him. I stood in the living room for a minute, then I went and made coffee. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. About a week later, Eugene called me with news that made my jaw tighten. Russell was still talking, going around town telling people I'd lost it. That I was confused, paranoid, accusing him of things that never happened. He was telling anyone who'd listened that my recent financial decisions were the result of cognitive decline, that I wasn't competent to manage my own affairs. He was laying the groundwork for a guardianship petition. I found out just how far it had spread when I walked into the Blue Cup coffee shop one Friday morning, and George Keats, who'd owned that place for 25 years and knew me as a regular, gave me a long, uncertain look before he brought my coffee. He didn't say anything he didn't have to. Later that day, I ran into Barbara Donahue at the grocery store. She pulled me aside and told me quietly that she'd heard people talking, that some of them believed what Russell was saying. I thanked her and drove straight to Dorothy's office. Dorothy wasn't surprised. This is a classic move, she said. He can't get the money directly. So now he's trying to get the court to hand him control through a guardianship. If he can convince a judge you're not competent, he gets everything anyway. He won't convince anyone who actually spends 5 minutes with me. Then let's make sure plenty of people spend time with you, she said. Publicly, visibly. We fight this on 2 fronts, legal and community. On the legal side, Dorothy assembled everything. Dr. Wells' medical report. Arthur's documentation of the forged power of attorney attempt. The revocation papers filed 11 days before the bank incident. A clear, documented timeline showing that every decision I made was planned, deliberate, and legally sound. On the community side, I decided to show up. I rejoined the book club at the Southside Library, which I dropped after Patty died. The first meeting back, I sat down and talked through a financial history essay I'd been reading. People listened. Nobody looked at me like I was confused. I signed up to volunteer at the Millbrook Community Center 2 mornings a week, helping seniors work through financial questions, retirement accounts, fraud prevention, estate basics. Marge Donovan, who ran the program, told me after my 3rd session that attendance had gone up 30% since I joined. I also wrote a piece for the local paper about protecting yourself from financial fraud. It ran on a Thursday. By Saturday, 3 people I barely knew had stopped me on the street to say they'd read it. Word gets around in a town like this, and slowly the word began to change. Russell filed the guardianship petition 6 weeks after he and Sandra left my house. Dorothy called me the morning the paperwork arrived and told me not to worry. We were ready. The hearing was in front of Judge Shirley Lomax, a woman with sharp eyes and very little patience for wasted time. Dorothy presented our case in order. Dr. Wells' cognitive evaluation first, scores in the top range for my age, no flags, no concerns. Then Arthur Webb's documentation of the forged power of attorney, the security footage, the employee testimony. Then the revocation papers I had signed 11 days before Russell ever walked into that bank. Then the article I'd written for the local paper. Photos from the community center. A letter from Marge Donovan describing my volunteer work. Russell's attorney argued that my decision to cut my son from the will was evidence of impaired judgment, that no mentally healthy father would do such a thing, that I had clearly been manipulated by outside influences. Judge Lomax let him finish. Then she looked at the stack of documentation Dorothy had submitted and asked Russell's attorney how a man with impaired judgment had managed to anticipate the fraud attempt, file revocation papers in advance, pass a full neurological evaluation, and write a published article about financial fraud prevention, all before the incident at the bank. Russell's attorney didn't have a good answer for that. Judge Lomax dismissed the petition. She also issued a formal statement on the record that the court could not be used as a tool in family disputes over inheritance, and that filing a guardianship petition without credible medical evidence of incapacity was a serious misuse of the judicial process. Russell and Sandra sat at their table without speaking. When it was over, Russell walked toward me in the hallway. I kept moving. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. That was 8 months ago now. Russell and Sandra sold their house and moved to Minneapolis. His brokerage firm closed. His broker's license was suspended following a Securities Commission inquiry. No criminal charges, but he can't work in finance anymore. Sandra took a position at a smaller law firm up there. I don't ask for details, and Eugene doesn't volunteer them unless I bring it up. The house is quieter than it used to be, but quiet and empty aren't the same thing, and it took me a while to understand that. About a month after the court hearing, I was cleaning out the garage and found my cello in the back corner. I'd played seriously in my 20s, stopped when work took over everything, and hadn't touched it in close to 40 years. I opened the case. The strings were shot and the wood needed attention, but the instrument itself was fine. I took it to a repair shop downtown, and while it was being worked on, I looked up music teachers in the area. Carol Price teaches strings at the Millbrook Music School. When I called and explained the situation, 67 years old, hadn't played in 4 decades, wanted to start again. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Come in Thursday at 10. I've been taking lessons twice a week since November." I'm not good. Carol is honest about that, which I appreciate. But she also told me something at our 3rd lesson that stuck with me. She said the hands remember things the mind has let go of. That muscle memory doesn't disappear, it just waits. I've been thinking about that more than I expected. The volunteering at the Millbrook Community Center turned into something I didn't anticipate. What started as a way to push back against Russell's narrative became the part of my week I look forward to most. I sit down with seniors who are suddenly alone, suddenly confused about accounts and insurance and estate questions their spouses used to handle. I know exactly what that confusion feels like. I spent 35 years in finance, and I still found it hard to think straight in those first months after Patty died. So I don't talk down to anyone. I just sit with them and work through it one step at a time. Marge Donovan told me last month we've had a 30% increase in attendance since I joined the program. I don't know if that's because of me specifically or just good timing. Either way, the room is full on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that's enough. Eugene and I still play chess on Wednesday mornings. I win maybe 1 game in 4, which he finds very satisfying. He was the first person I called when all of this started, and he showed up every single time without being asked. That matters more than I know how to say out loud. In June, a letter came from Russell. Minneapolis postmark. He wrote that he understood why I hadn't responded to his earlier note, that he wasn't writing to ask for anything. He mentioned that he and Sandra had separated, that he'd lost almost everything and had started attending a support group for gambling addiction, something he'd kept hidden for years, even from her. He said that my decision, as hard as it had been to face, was the first time in a long time that his actions had actually had consequences, that maybe he'd needed that. I read the letter twice. I put it in the desk drawer with the first one. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I will, but I didn't throw it away either, and I think that means something, though I'm still working out what. Patty's roses came back strong this spring. Better than last year, better than the year before. I've been paying closer attention to them, pruning at the right time, feeding the soil properly. Turns out they just needed someone to show up consistently. Most things do. I sit on the back porch most evenings now with a cup of coffee, looking out at the yard. 67 years old, retired, living alone, on paper. That sounds like a man winding down. But that's not what it feels like from the inside. It feels like I finally figured out what the days are actually for. Patty would have had something to say about all of it. She always did. I look at her photo on the mantelpiece sometimes, and I think about what she'd say now, about Russell, about the whole thing. I think she'd say I did what I had to do, that it cost what it cost, and that it was time to move forward. She'd be right. She usually was. Protecting what you built isn't cruelty. It's the last lesson a father can teach. If this story hit close to home, drop a 1 in the comments. You're not alone. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We put one out every week.